I'm Jim Collison, live from the Gallup campus in Studio B here in Omaha, Nebraska, as well as our office in Sydney, Australia. This is Gallup's Called to Coach, recorded on October 9th, 2018. Called to Coach is a resource for those who want to help others discover and use their strengths. We have Gallup experts and independent strengths coaches share tactics, insights, and strategies to help coaches maximize the talent of individuals, teams, and organizations around the world. If you have questions during this live webcast, we do have a chat room that's available for you right below the main video window. Just take a peek down there. Available for you. Log in. Bottom left-hand corner, it says log in. Choose the guest account. You don't need to create one. You could log in with any social media account that you have, but you could choose the guest account, take your name out, or take the guest name out, put your guest name in, put your name in. It's just fine. And then hit submit, and we'd love to have you in there. We'll take your questions during the program. If you're listening to the recorded version or have questions about custom strengths coaching solutions, you can send us an email, coaching, and this is really good for any questions you have, coaching@gallup.com. Don't forget to visit the Gallup Strengths Center. Just GallupStrengthsCenter.com for all your CliftonStrengths coaching resources and training needs. You can also catch the video now, downloadable and streaming audio. We call that podcasting. It's available for you. The instructions and all the links and everything you need are on our coaches blog. Just head out to coaching.gallup.com. Ann Lingenfelter is our host today. She works as a learning solutions consultant with Gallup out of our Sydney, Australia office. And Ann, it's always a challenge because it's late here in the United States when we get started with these for me to get the intro in 100% correct. But thank God you are here. And Ann, it's good to see you again.
Thanks, Jim. Always love to be here, and you always do a rock star job, as
I
you know.
appreciate it. My voice is always a little lower on the Australian version of Call the Coach because it's always late on a Monday night. But we got a dynamite show ahead. Why don't you get things started for us?
Yeah, absolutely. Jim, my guest today is Dr. Paige Williams. In addition to being a Gallup-certified coach and an independent consultant, she is a positive change expert who uses the science of well-being to improve performance with leaders and organizations. She is also a lecturer and researcher with the Center for Positive Psychology at the University of Melbourne. She leads the Applications of Positive Psychology course, and her research includes creating positive change, well-being at work, systems of well-being, and well-being literacy. I cannot wait to hear about the systems of well-being work, especially. I find that very, very interesting. So Paige, welcome to Call to Coach. You self-describe yourself as a pracademic. What's a pracademic?
I do, Anne. Thanks for the welcome. Well, it's someone who is a practitioner as well as an academic. So I very much see myself as bridging the two worlds. I'm passionate about interpreting science and academic language in a way that makes sense in the real world and that people can really do something with. So that's what I look to do. I'm a pracademic.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, and I know you'll have a lot to share with us today that will be of value to the folks who are watching and listening. They will want to know what your top 5 are. So can you share that with us, please?
Yeah, sure. It's relator, strategic, futuristic, connectedness, and I always forget the last one.
Maximizer. I'll help.
Maximizer. Of course it is. Oh.
There you go. That's excellent. Look, Jim, Paige and I were just talking before the show about how this is going to be one of those shows where we start very big picture, and we're going to talk about the overall field of positive psychology. And it's great to have someone who can speak so intelligently about that today. And then we're going to go drill down more into specific instruments and specific application. But I think it'll be particularly nice to be able to answer some of the questions that in my years at Gallup, I've often heard from folks out, that I'm talking with, whether they're prospects or clients, about things about, for instance, peer reviewing and that sort of thing. So we'll touch on that a little bit later. Let's start big picture and talk about the field of positive psychology. Certainly when that is the world in your realm that you operate in and day out. For us, sometimes when we're working with clients, perhaps who are outside of that space, in the corporate space, they'll question the validity of positive psychology. Can you talk a little bit about that science?
Yeah, sure, of course. So really, I mean, inherent in positive psychology is a strengths-based approach. Positive psychology takes a rigorous scientific approach to studying what makes life worth living. And this was something that psychology hadn't done up until around about 20 years ago, when a leader in the field, Martin Seligman, who was president of the American Psychological Association in the year 1999-2000, put a call out to the whole field to say, we know a lot about what makes life, what makes people challenged, what gives people challenge, what makes life difficult, but we really understand very little about what makes life worth living, what enables people to thrive, what brings them optimal levels of functioning and well-being. And at that point, that was kind of a pivot point in the field, whereby there was an invitation, a call to arms is the way Marty describes it, in terms of applying the same rigor, applying the same scientific method to understanding what enables people to live the lives that they most hope to live and dream of living. So inherent in that is really a strengths-based approach to life. And what started off as being something that came from perhaps initially from psychology has now, we call it the science of well-being, because now we see it across health, across business, in education. And so we really see this as an approach that has an approach of its time. It really has gained momentum across a variety of fields and disciplines.
Mm. I recently had the opportunity to attend the Positive Education Schools Association conference at Geelong Grammar School. And of course, Martin Seligman was there. That was a great few days, and I learned a lot. I had also had the opportunity to sit down with him and speak to him a bit, because he had a lot of conversations and interactions and dealings with Don Clifton, who is one of our former CEOs and our current CEO's father. And Marty Seligman said to me in our conversation, if I'm the father of positive psychology, Don Clifton was the grandfather. And I thought that was saying really strong words. And so I had a look at his book, The Hope Circuit, and flipped through and was looking at the areas of when back in the old days when they were getting together, Don Clifton, Marty Seligman, and some of the other really fathers and creators of this movement. So it was great to definitely great to see that, and know that Gallup was part of that from the beginning as well. But certainly when I came to Australia and started working here, I heard all of the talk that I would hear about would be around Marty Seligman's work and values and action and the work out of Geelong Grammar School. So again, I think that'll be interesting to dig a little bit deeper into that later on in the show and all of the great research that's been done there. But so obviously, Gallup's Strengths Finder or CliftonStrengths instrument is grounded as well in positive psychology. But how do you address the sort of the naysayers? And I understand that any science that's out there will have people who will say, well, what about this, and potentially detract from it in some ways. But we have issues. Some people will say that there's been issues with positive psychology in the last few years, like for instance, Barbara Fredrickson's positivity ratio paper that was published in 2005, and then portions of it had to be retracted because some of the numbers didn't seem to quite add up in some ways. Can you talk a little bit about that and the impact that sort of thing has had on positive psychology overall?
Yeah, of course. So I think there are two levels at which to address this, particularly if we're talking to people in organizations. At a very practical level, we can simply ask people the question, do you think you perform better when you're feeling well? Or do you think you'll perform better when you're not having a great day? And if we reflect on our own lives, we know that when our relationships are going well, when we have mental clarity, when we have great levels of energy, we perform better. So at a very, very practical level, even if we strip away the science from our own experiences, we know that when we feel well, in general, we do better, we perform better. So that's one way that we can address that. But if we take the specific issues that have come up in relation to positive psychology, so let's talk about the Barbara Fredrickson article first. The issue with that was that the statistical methodology that was applied was not appropriate given the nature of the data that was collected. Now, in general terms, the principle of that piece of research, which was around the positivity ratio, we need to have more positive experiences in our lives than negative experiences. And in that article, it was proposed that there was a specific ratio of around 3 to 1 that was the tipping point. Now, that specific ratio of 3-to-1 was what the methodology through which that ratio was reached was what was questioned and found not to be appropriate. The principle behind that, of us needing more positive experiences than negative experiences in our lives to support well-being, has been replicated in a number of different ways, in a number of different contexts, and has shown to be true and valid. So whilst, yes, that we can say, yep, that piece of that research was not shown to be valid and appropriate, the principle underpinning that research in terms of a positivity ratio and its connection to well-being absolutely has been shown to be valid beyond that one piece of research. So I think it's important that we understand that any research that's done is done to the best of the knowledge of the people involved at that time. Okay, but we always say in the academy that we are building always on the shoulder of giants, people that came before us, and knowledge is forever evolving. You know, even Martin Seligman famously went back to his learned helplessness theory and said, you know what, I was wrong about that. And he proposed PERMA as a theory and framework of well-being. We hope to disprove, as we understand more about the complexity of well-being, the perhaps more simplified theories and frameworks that we started with. So, you know, continual evolution and development is the nature of science. And then if we can, I
yes,
can
go
talk
ahead.
kind of more broadly about the field generally. You know, look, when Marty first introduced the field of positive psychology, it was very much about swinging a pendulum that had been so far over in terms of looking at a problem-based approach, a deficit-based approach, particularly in the field of psychology, that there was a lot of emphasis on pushing back against that and going, no, we need to come the other way and look at the positive side of things. Now, inherently, our brains are wired for negativity. We have something called the negativity bias, which means that we scan the environment, we look for problems, we look for challenges, and we look to try and either reduce the risk or eliminate the risk. And that's been really valuable and useful for us from a survival perspective. So we need to counter our natural inherent ways of thinking and operating anyway. And if you look about what the first probably 10 years of the field was about, it was about kind of getting the pendulum to swing the other way. Now, the danger in that is that some of the connections may have been overstated, or it felt a bit like there was too much inflation of what the possibility around this was. I think what we've seen in the last 5 to 10 years is that that's coming back a bit now. There's a lot more research about how is it that positive and negative experiences and emotions actually work together to bring us different types of well-being, different aspects of well-being. And so I think that there are some specific areas where the research has been shown to be flawed in terms of its methodology. And we're evolving as a field that still only is about 15 or 20 years old in terms of being more rigorous and careful around the way that we present findings and outcomes to the general public.
Yeah, I love that. And, you know, it's interesting because with the Gallup's tool, the Strengths Finder, CliftonStrengths, we absolutely go through those same processes of tweaking it and researching it and putting it in front of panels of scientists that are external to Gallup and saying, okay, you know, have a look at this and help us with this. And it has continued to go through many, many iterations. And in the very near future, we're putting out our most recent technical report on the Strengths Finder. So if you go back through the technical report of the instrument, you can look at the changes that have happened over time. And certainly that's something that happens with us as well. It's a little different because we are a business that we, you know, do not open our IP to be torn apart and looked at in the same way that in an academic environment will happen. But I'll talk a lot about some of the research that's out there that we have and that our listeners can take advantage of looking into to see how that process has gone through. But absolutely, it is about revising and refining and as things change, tweaking it. One of the things I find interesting when I listen to you talk, Paige, and also when I was at the conference at Geelong Grammar, the focus is so heavily on well-being. And in our world, when we're using strengths with our clients, we talk an awful lot about engagement and performance. And performance outcomes may be an improved well-being, but the strengths really is focusing on performance outcomes in sort of that broader category. So it's interesting, when you're a Gallup certified coach. I mean, when you started dealing with strengths, is that what you saw as well? Did you see sort of a different slant with that instrument to the other ones that you work with?
So I think firstly, it's useful for us to just spend a few moments unpacking this construct of well-being, okay? Because well-being isn't just one thing. We often use the metaphor of well-being is like the weather, and the weather is a construct. But what makes up the weather are many different elements. It's humidity, it's temperature, it's whether it's raining, whether it's cloudy, and well-being is a bit the same. So well-being is this higher level construct, and how we are going in terms of achievement and performance is definitely part of that. Maybe that's the humidity part of the weather, but alongside that are things like how are our relationships, and how satisfied do we feel with our lives, how much positive emotion are we experiencing, how engaged do we feel with what's going on in our lives. So if we then wrap the context around that of, let's say, the workplace, because traditionally that is where Gallup has been applied, then we can relate that kind of construct of well-being, that weather construct of well-being, to the workplace. So whilst Gallup may have been developed with performance in mind in terms of what outcomes are being achieved, we rarely get to performance without having good relationships, without feeling a high level of engagement and energy, without experiencing positive emotion as we achieve. And often there's a feeling of meaning and purpose associated with achieving good outcomes in the workplace. So whilst Gallup may have been developed and is used with a particular lens in mind, from a well-being perspective, it's like saying the weather is only rainy, and we're not then thinking about how much cloud or humidity there is. It doesn't make sense. So the way I approach Gallup, I always put hand in hand, well, the way I approach all my work with my clients, and the way that I interpret positive psychology for my students, is well-being and performance go hand in hand. When we're feeling well, we generally are doing well. And what that performance is depends. I mean, it may be in a work context, it's meeting your KPIs, but it may be outside of work, it's about coaching your son's footy team to win the league, or it may be supporting a friend in their fitness goals, or it may be your volunteering work. So really defining what performance is gives you the context for how you're engaging your well-being to achieve your performance outcomes.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. And that's definitely the way we look at it as well, when we're looking both at our our clients in education, and also our corporate clients. We look at the different, everyone has their own well-being model, right? And ours is, we're no different. We have one that looks at 5 different elements of well-being.
That's right. Yeah.
And for us, it's really through your strengths that you're able to sort of impact the areas of well-being that are lacking. So it's because we all know that you can be thriving in, let's say, your purpose, the purpose part of your well-being, but perhaps because you're thriving in that element and have a great job, or got a promotion, or just started something new, and are really engaged there, perhaps then on the other side your social well-being is not doing as well, or your physical well-being is not doing as well, because you are more stressed, or don't have the time to dedicate to family and relationships that you used to. So for us, we use strengths as an intervention to address those issues for well-being. So it is very similar there. It's interesting that when I first started working in the education space in Australia, it was obvious that from the work that's happened at Geelong Grammar and with VIA, that was definitely what was on most people's radar, because that's been going on for so many years, and has been so well done by the folks at Geelong Grammar, and the work that they're doing. It's interesting because Gallup's work originally started in education as well, but it was in the States. So it was something that very much was. One of the famous quotes from Don Clifton was that was our greatest contribution, is to make sure that there's a student in every classroom that feels like they're treated like a real human being. And the way that happened was having teachers understand the unique patterns of thought, feeling, and behaving that these students had, and being able to address them in that way. So it's exciting for me to be involved in work now in Australia, being able to bring Gallup into that space and help people like yourself and others understand and know more about our science and what we're doing in that space. So it's great to be able to partner with folks like you. On that note, one of the things in my work here, I've often heard, Paige, is people saying, okay, well, the Gallup tool is really good and we really like the language and all that, but it's not peer reviewed. Can you talk about peer reviewing, what that really means for those of us who are not in academics, and why it's
Yeah.
considered the gold standard for academics?
Yeah, sure. Okay. So, each field or industry has its currency. Okay, what's important? What's the priority in that field? So in academia, getting published is the currency. So what we have to do as academics is conduct research and build theory, and then we write journal articles for academic journals. And then those articles that are presenting the results or the theory or our work is then sent around to a number of our peers, so other academics who are specialists in the field that we're in, and they will review the article. And there are many, many benefits of that in that, I mean, anyone that's done it gets close to a piece of work, to have a fresh set of eyes look at it and to really test your logic is wonderful. And so, but it's very rigorous. It means that you've got someone who is an expert in your field and is really challenging your thinking and making sure that what you're presenting to the world at large is rigorous, is appropriately communicated in terms of the claims that you're making, either about the theoretical construction or the results of your research. And often you will go through this process a number of times. So it's not unusual from when you submit your article to a journal, to an editor, it can take up to between 18 months and 2 years to go through that peer review process to get to a point where your article is published. Okay. So it's a rigorous process that means that it's almost like, it's like your safety belt in terms of making sure that what's presented out to the world is rigorous, is of an appropriate standard, is communicated clearly, and meets the standards of the academy. And so it's an underlying, it's a highly held principle in academia that actually any work that is published is out there because other academics have kind of said, yes, this is appropriate to be shared.
Interesting.
So that's the peer review process.
What is your perspective or opinion on Gallup's instrument not being peer reviewed or widely peer reviewed is what I should probably say. And do you, what's your experience with it as far as validity goes?
Okay, so I think again there are two perspectives on this. So if I put my academic hat on, in terms of when I teach about strengths into the Masters of Applied Positive Psychology course at the University of Melbourne, I very much have to say, this is the instrument. Here is the technical report, which is so impressive and so transparent. This is not a peer-reviewed instrument. Whereas if you go to something like the Values in Action Framework or the Strengths Profile out of the UK, those have had peer review. Some peer review. VIA's had lots. Strengths Profile has had not quite as much, but some peer review research associated with it. What does that mean in terms of validity? Well, in terms of the validity of the instrument, it doesn't necessarily mean that that Gallup is any way less valid. In fact, if you compare the amount of kind of validity done around CliftonStrengths compared to Strengths Profile, Gallup in terms of numbers, sheer volume, blows it out of the water. So it really depends what audience you're speaking to. Most of my corporate clients really, quite frankly, couldn't give a stuff about peer review. They don't know what it is because it's not in their world. But when I have my teaching hat on, I need to be able to say, because we ask our students to write from an academic perspective. And so, they have to they have to kind of be cognizant of that as they're comparing and contrasting the different frameworks. So certainly it doesn't stop me using Gallup. I very much enjoy using Gallup. My clients like it. As you say, the language is very transferable. So it's just something to understand that if you're working in a particular field, if you're associated with academia, then no, it's not peer reviewed.
Thank you for speaking to that. I appreciate your talking about the two hats, because that's our experience with it as well. Some people don't, they couldn't care less if it's peer reviewed or not, but then others, it is the most important thing. So I did, in preparation for our show, because I'm out of my depth here and do not have the same level of understanding and expertise as you, Paige. I got in touch with Gallup's chief scientist, whose name is Jim Asplund, and we had a great talk. And he's the one who told me that the new technical report is about to come out. And this, for those who don't know, this is the CliftonStrengths Finder, or CliftonStrengths Technical Report 2.0. This one was put out in March of 2014. So the next one is about to come out. It's 40 pages. And you're right. It's very transparent and gives a lot about the system and how it's being done, and the scoring for it and so forth. But it is not, this in itself is not a peer-reviewed article.
But however, I would like to say, though, that level of transparency isn't necessarily available for other frameworks, because they have peer-reviewed journal articles, but it doesn't necessarily go into the technical data that report does. So again, I think I understand more about the kind of the behind the scenes of CliftonStrengths from reading that report than I would necessarily from reading a journal article about VIA or about the strengths profile. So yeah, it's an impressive document.
Yes. Well, thank you. And to your point as well, I think CliftonStrengths is just about 19.5 million completes now. And we have an enormous amount of data that links we do have a strengths meta-analysis, which is able to link the impact of taking strengths and using strengths on performance outcomes and on engagement levels. So there's an awful lot out there. And for those who are interested in that, you can Google the CliftonStrengths Technical Report, and you'll find it. You can also go on to what is it, ResearchGate, researchgate.com. So Jim Asplund, who's our chief scientist, and some other folks have put many articles and reports there. And Jim very kindly sent me this 40 pages of articles that are both Gallup books, peer-reviewed publications, and non-peer-reviewed. And there's a lot of interesting, if anybody's interested in this, please do reach out, because I'd be happy to share this with you. He said that it's fine to share. There's 5 or 6 articles of note that are published by a Michelle Lewis. I don't know if you're familiar with Michelle Lewis, but she published several articles starting in 2004, it looks like 2006, and very interesting articles that are going in, that are also in things like the Encyclopedia of Positive Psychology. Anyway, there's a lot there for those who are interested in reading. So certainly, have a look at that, or reach out to us if you're interested in having a look at some of that information. But the bottom line is, it is, to your point, something that, sharing our IP and the science and the math behind our instrument is not something that we're willing to do any more than we have. But we're confident in its validity. But I certainly appreciate your explanation, Paige, as to why people ask that question and why it matters and what it really means. So thank you for that. I'd love to hear, in your expertise, if you had to just sort of summarize the Gallup strengths and the other instruments you use, how would you differentiate them? Or are there certain environments or situations where you find them a different tool more applicable?
Yeah. Okay. So I think that this is where, actually, coming back to the core research question behind each of, so let's put it out there first of all. So the 3 main strengths frameworks that I'm familiar with are CliftonStrengths, values in action, and the strengths profile out of the UK. So they're the three I'm going to refer to. Now, what's useful, I think, in terms of understanding, well, what's the difference between them? They're all strengths. Does it really matter? Is to look at what's the core question that they seek to answer by proposing the strengths framework. So if we take Gallup, first of all, Gallup asks the question, what takes me towards success? What will take me towards near perfect performance if I develop my talent into a strength? Okay, so critical in that is what takes me towards success. If we look at the values in action framework, that was very much developed with a moral overlay. So what does the best of human character look like? And that was the question that Peterson and Seligman started with, and when they started to explore and build out the framework that came to 24 character strengths and 6 virtues, and they're called character strengths. Okay. Now, if we go to the strengths profile out of the UK, that's a framework that has actually 60 strengths associated with it. And one of the key questions around that is, what energizes me? Okay, so when do I feel energized? When do I feel like I've got, if you like, higher levels of engagement, maybe even flow, when I lose myself? But what's interesting about that framework, which I find particularly useful, is it differentiates between realized and what they call unrealized strengths. So realized strengths are the ones that we know we have and we use regularly, and unrealized strengths are those things that they give us energy, but we're not actually getting the opportunity to use them very much. So this is really an opportunity area for us. Okay. So if we come back to those 3 questions, moving towards success, best of the human character, what energizes me, depending on what, certainly from a client perspective, depending on what they're looking to achieve in terms of a performance outcome in its most general sense, then depends on what framework might be most relevant to them. So it's really about a matching. So that's why for many schools, you know, embedded in the education system over here has been character education for many, many years. So it does make sense to a certain extent that the values in action, which is about character strengths, would be a natural fit for schools. And then when you think about, well, what's being taught in the classrooms, we really need the teachers to be across that. We need to have one language and one framework within schools. You know, you can see how the story has evolved around VIA being the character strength of the character framework of choice for schools. And also, I mean, I worked at Geelong Grammar for 11 years. I was there when Marty stayed with us for 9 months when it first began. And obviously Marty helped develop, he and Chris Peterson developed the values in action framework. So that framework came with the work that Marty and his team did from day one at Geelong Grammar.
Yeah, excellent. I think one of my early conversations was with you and I think it was you who explained to me the history, and this is why there's been such a focus on this in education, and you filled in a lot of the blanks for me, coming from outside of Australia and coming in and understanding sort of the horizon, and we were thrilled when you came on to get Gallup certified, because and have appreciated how open you've been to bringing the concepts into the Masters of Applied Positive Psychology there. So certainly have appreciated the work that you've done. When I'd like you to kind of shift hats now, and let's talk to you as an independent consultant, and really the work that you're doing using Gallup Strengths with some of your clients, and would love to hear some success stories and just understanding what you've learned in the process of that in that part of your business.
Oh, yeah, sure. So I think the first thing I need to kind of flag is that I've only been Gallup trained for about a year now. So although very familiar with strengths-based approaches and that kind of thing, actually using the Gallup framework and tool is something that I still feel I've kind of got my training wheels on, but I've certainly enjoyed using it with a number of clients in the time since I've been certified. So one of my clients, a regional insurance company here in Victoria, was particularly interested in engagement and a sales focus in terms of their organisation, but had quite a broad range in terms of people who were fairly settled and kind of in their mid-career onwards, weren't going to be going anywhere. You know, family was in place, that kind of thing. And then people coming into the industry, really kind of needing to get their heads and hearts and hands around what it meant to be in this kind of almost sales but consultant client services driven type industry. And we used Q12 as a way to get a sense of different levels of engagement. And we analyzed it in a really smart way to look at, well, how did engagement change by gender, by age, by role, by tenure with the company, by position within the company. So we started to get a real profile of where the pockets of disengagement were, so that we could then be very targeted in having conversations around, well, what's going on with that group of people, or why is it that once you've been with the company for 5 years or beyond, engagement goes down. So we were very strategic about not just using the Q12, but then what we did with the data to really get some intelligent information from it. And then I used strengths then to help re-engage, so help people take another perspective about how they could come to show up at work in a way that was authentic to them, in a way that meant that they would intentionally use their strengths, and then coach managers about, so what is it that you can do that really enables people to bring their best selves to work every day, and means that you're getting the best from them. And we certainly saw those engagement levels grow over the period of time I was working with the organization, about 3 years. And interestingly, we did analysis as we went through to see, well, where was there the highest level of reported strengths-based work going on in particular branches, and what was happening in terms of them meeting their financial KPIs. And we saw that relationship that Gallup so clearly report between strengths use, engagement at work, and performance outcomes, which for this client meant meeting sales targets. And that was very clear over the 4 years. So branches where there was lots of strengths work going on, engagement went up, performance went up. In branches where that wasn't happening, we saw completely the other side of the coin. So that was one where I feel like it met the kind of the classic Gallup connection, or the connection I make anyway, between strengths work, engagement, performance outcomes, and creating this environment where we enable people to be their best, be well, and do well.
No, absolutely. And I love that you had that experience. And I guess one of the things that almost all of my conversations with clients I bring in is that whole Q12 engagement element, because when we're trying to think about, we have these wonderful theories and these wonderful programs like a strengths-based approach. But when it's really about how are you going to operationalize that? How are you going to bring it into the systems and processes? How are you going to give it teeth? And that's where so many people struggle. And for us, using Q12, which for those who don't know is basically our human needs at work framework, right? And it's something that we use and encourage managers to use those items as talking points with their individual contributors, and coaches to use it when they're coaching their clients. Whether they're measuring employee engagement or not, it's a great framework for discussion. But we find that it's a really excellent way to connect those dots and get from strengths to performance. We know that there is a relation between strengths and performance, even if you're not looking and measuring engagement or focusing on that. But there's a very, very easy and a direct relationship when you have engagement as a stepping stone there. So when we start thinking about that, and we start talking about systems, and we start talking about the greater picture, let's talk about that now, because I often say to people, you take someone, you introduce them to strengths, you equip them and empower them, and suddenly they see themselves different. And then you put them back in their work environment or their life environment. And it's like a demolition derby, right? They get beat up out there in life, and then you pull them out and you patch them up and show them, what they're equipped with, and provide agency and hope and all of those wonderful things. And then you put them back in, right? And if the system hasn't changed, what can you do to start bringing about incremental change in that system? So I'd love to hear what you have learned in your systems approach work.
Yeah, great. Love to. So this was the focus of my PhD research, which I did at Geelong Grammar School. And so this was about exactly that. How is it that if we broaden people's horizons, whether it's through strengths-based work specifically or more broadly around positive psychology and the science of well-being, and what the opportunity is for each person to have their own agency and set their own agenda for creating well-being in their lives. If we do that and then send them back into a system that doesn't enable them to live out those broader horizons and those positive expectations, we can actually risk taking people back even further. And so my work at Geelong Grammar showed this. My work at Grammar showed that when we put people, gave them the opportunity to go through positive psychology training, but then when they went back into a system that hadn't changed, their well-being actually went back beyond lower than baseline, lower than when it started before they had the intervention. So how is it that we create these systems of well-being, or systems of strengths, if we're talking specifically about Gallup? And really, this is again, we've got 3 areas of research within the centre. One of them is systems-informed positive psychology. So we are actually at the cutting edge of moving positive psychology from what has been predominantly individualistic, predominantly about reducing and simplifying things, to actually saying, no, that's not real life. Real life is messy. Real life is complex. Real life is about dynamics between different people, different factors in your context. We need to bring that into positive psychology. And then we're going to have a science and a field of study that really can get some traction in the real world. And so we're at the beginning of this in terms of setting some, as we tend to do in academia, setting some principles and theoretical constructs and that kind of thing, building the field from the ground up. But when I look to operationalize that in my work with clients, I tend to go back to using the model I created in my research, which is thinking about inside out and outside in. So from a strengths-based perspective, when we introduced an individual to something like CliftonStrengths and they start to understand a bit more about themselves, how to show up at their best, what takes them towards their best performance, we're creating a change from the inside out. They're starting to see themselves differently. They're going to show up in a different way, whether it's at work or at home. Their attitudes will change. So their behaviors will change, their thinking patterns will change. These are all things that we can't separate from the individual, so change from the inside out. But again, as we've said, if we put them back into a system where actually the influences outside them from the outside in don't reinforce those inside out changes, then that's when we get this disconnect. So how is it we can look at systems, small s systems in the organization? So whether it's the structure of the organization, whether it's processes like performance review conversations, coaching conversations, how is it that we can create structures and systems within the organization that nudge us to create a system of strengths around the individual, so that actually the changes that are happening from the inside out are reinforced and, if anything, amplified by what happens in their experience in the workplace. And I believe a critical factor in this is leadership, because when you look at the inside out, outside in factors, if we create strengths-based leadership in organizations, we're creating an inside out change for those individual leaders. But the experience of those leaders from their followers is an outside in experience, because their leadership will change. The way they lead others will change as they understand their own strengths and take a strengths-based perspective with their teams, with problem solving, with the way to get the best out of meeting the project deadlines. So for me, as we think about inside out, outside in, and creating system change, the simplest way I found to talk about it with organizations is get that middle band of leaders really understanding their strengths and operating in a strengths-based perspective, and they will naturally change the system for you, because they'll start tweaking their processes, they'll start having different conversations, they'll start suggesting things that will mean the oil in the wheels starts becoming strengths-based. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's very much our experience as well. It's great to hear it from you and to understand that that's, something that you're working on there. I'd be keen to read and understand more about it. It's for us, a lot of it, again, has been around the systems and processes that are like engagement, like manager as coach, equipping people that especially, and you'll know because you've been around Gallup, that we look at the manager at that local level. Engagement is a local issue, and it's something where we talk about it as engagement as a contact sport, which means you're really
absolutely.
it's all about having conversations and feeling comfortable having conversations about what's going on, and people are not typically people are not natural managers. So we have about 1 in 10 that is just has that innate talent. And even without all of this learning, they'll walk into an organization and that's who they will be. Right. But for the most people, it's not like that at all. Most people are managers because they were excellent at something that they did, or they've been around for a long time. Right. Not necessarily because they're comfortable having those conversations. But so for us, it's about that as well. And we find, we talk a lot with organizations about identifying the why. Why do you want to do strengths? What's the point for you? What's your why? Because it's not about doing strengths. It's about being the vehicle to, strengths is just the vehicle to help you achieve what it is you've already said you're going to achieve in your mission statement and your goals and in your KPIs and all of that. So it's, but it's great. And to be able to bring it in to, if we look at the life cycle of an employee, starting from onboarding and all the way until exit interviews, and looking at every input along the way where those strengths conversations can be brought into the systems and processes. And there's so many of them, right, that are out there. If you go on to if you plug it into any of the Gallup coaching communities and start sharing and looking at all the information that's being shared out there by folks like yourself, it's just brilliant to see how much success people are having in that space, with those sorts of things. So what I might do is pause for just a moment to draw breath, because we've just been going on and on, and ask you, Jim, any questions out there in the chat room, or anything that you have on your mind that you'd like to ask Paige?
Actually, we've got some in the chat room. It's been kind of nice to have some folks out there. I'm not going to lie. But let me make 2 clarifications, just Anne, from some conversation earlier. The technical report, probably the easiest place to get that is at the Gallup Strengths Center. So if you just go Gallup-Strengths-Center.com, scroll down to the help, go to the FAQ, everything we have, all the questions that you've ever had, or not all of them, but many of them are listed there. And then I was talking with Jim Asplin while you guys were chatting. And so he was kind enough to answer his email at 10:45 here in the evening.
Hi, Jim.
And Jim says that report will probably come out sometime next year. So, and I just know you said that, and then I thought, oh my gosh, I am going to get inundated
Sorry,
with email requests for the new report. Like, where is it? Coach is dying.
I was definitely going to send you one, Jim.
I know, yeah, Paige, I saw that you were writing that down. So that'll probably be out. It'll be out. It's in support of the All 34 report that is coming, the brand new one coming out here October 24th of 2018. That new report will go live. The technical report will not go live behind it. It'll be some time before we have that updated, and that's available.
Well, and this list of I know you have a question on the back of that, but this list of articles and publications that Jim sent me that is really lengthy. Is that something that we can connect or put on the show link or something so that people can access
send that to me, and we'll put it in the show notes for this program. So folks, go to coaching.gallup.com and find this program. I wish I had a show and episode number, but I wasn't quite ready for that. But if they find that, we'll have the show notes in there. We'll have it in the show notes as well. Going back, Chris in the chat room, Chris Townsend's out here, and he had said he oftentimes in the peer review conversation, he doesn't get that as much as he gets, Paige, and I'll throw this question to you. Kind of that, because it's a self-selected, self-answering assessment, that it introduces some bias in, right? Because I can only know, I probably know me better than anybody, but I can sometimes fool myself. Sometimes we have people take the assessment that they'll take it 6 or 7 or a dozen times. Thank you for doing that. But it is one of those kinds of things where they're hoping to get something and they don't. How when people talk to you about self, when they're answering the questions and they can say anything they want, and it introduces some bias to it. Paige, what do you say to that? How do you help individuals kind of get past that? Yeah, it is a self-reporting tool.
Absolutely. And look, so many instruments most instruments in psychology certainly are, you're reflecting on your own psyche. All of the strengths tools are, so it's not something that's unique to Gallup in that way. I think that the critical question comes in debriefing the results with individuals. Certainly I do this in coaching, but I also do it, in teams as we look at the results. And that is, when you first saw that report, what was your gut feel? Did you kind of read your top 5 and think, oh my, they nailed it. That's me. That's a bit freaky. Someone's been following me around. Haha. And realize that what you put in is what you're going to get out, right? Yeah. So the quality of information, if you're reading your report and going, really? That's not me. Who answered this? Then you need to check, how did you respond to the questions? Or is it that you're not, where's the authenticity in that? If you look at the full 34 report, if you've got that one, well, what is it you're expecting to be further up? And is it that you really behave in that way? In a Gallup sense, you've got to think, this is how I think, feel, and behave. Or, well, do I, or would I like to? And so, yeah, there certainly is a kind of a self-checking process that, as a coach or as a facilitator, whatever your role is, you need to check in with people. Well, how did that land with you? Do you feel you own that report, the information that you're looking at? Bear in mind, you're the only one who provided data for it. So, and then have that conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And do you want to add anything to that? I got another question behind it.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, the only thing that I would say is that when you do look at the technical report, it probably talks about, questions and how there'll be a repetition of certain questions in different ways, so that it's not so obvious. And we certainly see that in some of our other, like our selection instruments, and our engagement, the sorting effect that our questions have. So sometimes it's not so obvious what you need to answer in order to get a certain outcome. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
so,
it tries to trick you. Is what it does. Yeah, absolutely. It tries to trick you. No,
I think the other thing I'd say about CliftonStrengths particularly is because you've got the time limit on answering the questions. If anything, you're less likely to get now, do I want to be that or do I want to be that? Because people know that there's only 20 seconds to answer the question. So I think that helps to limit that kind of social desirability response, or that social desirability bias, which is what that's called.
Yeah, it's why we really suggest they only turn the timer off if they absolutely have to. And, reading disabilities or any kind of disabilities where it needs to be read to it. We have some folks who get paranoid, like, no, I want to answer the question correctly. You don't limit me to 20 seconds. And we really tell, it's really best if it's top of mind and you're rolling through those questions. Paige, I work with students. I work with a lot of students. In my job, I come across college and now high school students, which are post-millennial, right? These are these high school students that are working are really, and they're not identifying with the millennials a lot. What I am seeing is some consistency in, you started the program with talking about kind of the history of this idea of positive psychology. But I think we live in a world now where these students are super comfortable thinking that, I should focus on what I'm good at. And, right. I mean, I think positive psychology makes sense to them. And I feel like at times we don't need to convince them anymore. Would you agree or disagree with me in the work that you're doing to say, I'm not sure we have to do a lot of convincing anymore that positive psychology is the right, is the right thing to do? I think people are getting it. I don't know. Respond to that.
So so in essence, I agree with you. I think that what we're working with when I talked about kind of swinging of the pendulum is a generational change. We've still got baby boomers who were around when rations were around, and there was a very different mindset around what a good life looked like and what was normal in terms of level of challenge and problem and difficulty. Okay, when you talk about millennials, we're talking about a generation who have not had that kind of experience of challenge and not having enough and having they have different challenges. It's not to say that, they're well documented. So I think that, yes, in part, your question is probably true in that this overriding principle of looking at what makes life worth living and what makes life go well, there's elements of that millennials are very easy to jump on board, very quick to jump on board with. But if you ask them, what brings your life meaning and purpose, let's talk about relationships. If we understand this construct of well-being as being multifaceted and complex and dynamic, then I think that there would be challenges there. We certainly hear a lot about how fragile the well-being and emotional and psychological health of young people are. And so I think that, yes, there are aspects of it that probably are more easily digested by the millennials. The principle is probably more easily digested, but this is where we get into the complexity and nuance of well-being, and how actually even something as simple as understanding your strengths will help you be more resilient, will help you understand how to connect with people in an authentic way. So yes and no in answer to your question.
Yeah, no. And, there's never absolutes, right, in this. But it is, I find less resistance to this idea and more that part's accepted easier. But as you're saying, they come with a whole host of other issues that they have to deal with that, by the way, these can be pointed at just as easily. And that, you can really work. I mean, I think they work fabulous in that environment. And when we see our students embrace them, nothing's better than when I do a stand up with a bunch of high schoolers and they start talking about how they're going to utilize each other's strengths, in the team. And you're like, yes, they got it. Right. And that's pretty cool. I just don't think we have to convince them as much, at least that these things are true. One more question from Chris out in the chat room. He wants to know recommendations from you. If he was to start putting a library together of positive psychology for dummies, right? Where would he start? Like, what would be some good resources that he could turn to outside of some of the stuff we're currently doing? What would you recommend? Some books or some things to go to?
So let me read off my bookshelf here. So there's a great book called Positive Psychology in a Nutshell by a lady called Ilona Boniwell. Now, it's out of print at the moment, but you'll still be able to buy it online. It's great. It's a really bite-sized, easy to consume. She goes through all the main theories, and she has a really lovely kind of tone and style of writing. If you want something kind of a bit heavier than that, you could go to any of Martin Seligman's books. They're great, but can be quite theoretical. Let's look behind me. Applied Positive Psychology out of the UK is a great one if you are wanting to think about, okay, how do we take the theory, but then immediately make the translation into operationalizing and putting it into practice. And that's by Tim Lomas and his colleagues. And there are some great books coming out from my colleagues at the Center for Positive Psychology. Dr. Peggy Kern, she is writing with Michelle McQuaid, who's a practitioner over here. Professor Lindsay Oates is writing some fabulous stuff around wellbeing literacy. And Professor Lee Waters has just released a book this year on strengths-based parenting. And that's been really widely accepted internationally. So if that's an area that you're particularly interested in, I'd recommend that too.
Yeah, fantastic.
And we are short on time, so I'm going to ask you to bring it in for a landing.
All right, absolutely. So, look, Paige, you've been fabulous as I knew you would be. Thank you for your time. Is there anything that we did not touch on that you think is important to mention before we go? Anything I should have asked you?
Oh, there's so much more we could talk about, Anne. Let's come back and do another episode one day. But no, I think it's been fabulous.
Okay, fantastic. Well, I'm sure that we'll, as soon as this is edited, we'll send it out to all those out there who are interested and certainly appreciate your joining us today. So thanks so much for that, Paige.
Thanks, Anne. And if I can help anyone with this, there is my website. And please come and check out the Center for Positive Psychology as well on the University of Melbourne website. Have a look at the research there. It all relates to strengths work. So, love to see you at either of those two places.
Yeah.
Good.
Thanks
Well,
again.
we appreciate you coming out. Thanks for doing that. We'll try to put as many links as we can in the show notes, make them available for you. We'll remind everyone to take full advantages of all the resources we have available at the Gallup Strengths Center. I mentioned the FAQ, which is the most underutilized resource at the Gallup Strengths Center. People ask me questions on Facebook all the time, and I just go to the FAQ. You can get it without having to ask me, Gallup-Strengthscenter.com. Send us your questions or comments. If you do have a question you just can't get answered, you can send us an email, coaching@gallup.com. Don't forget, you can catch this program as well as all the past ones are available for you. The links and ways to get to them, all that stuff, available at our coaches blog, coaching.gallup.com. And mention becoming a Gallup Certified Strengths Coach. All the courses that lead to that and information on how to do it is available on our courses page. Just go to courses.gallup.com, or you can send us an email. If you want to stay up to date on all the webcasts that are going on, if you want to catch us live like Chris and Nate did tonight out there, appreciate that. You can get all that information, gallup.eventbrite, and that's BRITE.com. And then last website, we know we gave you a lot of websites tonight, but join us on our Facebook group. Lots of resources going on out there, and that's facebook.com/groups. And then just put /call-to-coach and ask to be invited in. I will let you in, and we'd love to, about 12,000 out there on that Facebook group, and we'd love to have you out there. I want to thank you for joining us, either live or recorded. With that, we'll say goodbye, everybody.